A gentle breeze swept across the stone-tiled sidewalk of JFK Airport as Imani Blake stepped out of a sleek black Mercedes. Her neatly tied high bun shimmered under the golden lights of the first-class entrance. Dressed in a perfectly tailored, earth-toned suit, she didn't need to prove her status. Her presence alone was enough. The staff at the elite entrance greeted her with polite smiles, but their eyes betrayed a subtle curiosity. A black woman in this space always made people do a double take. Imani didn't care. She was used to it. From strategy meetings with white pharmaceutical executives to presentations before all-male boards of directors, she had learned how to stay silent and win. Today, she was boarding Aerovar Air Flight 799 to Zurich, where she would finalize a $2 billion deal to bring her company's regenerative cell biotechnology, VitaGene, into the European market. It was a significant step, not just for her, but for the field of regenerative medicine, long dominated by white titans from Switzerland and Germany. Seat 1A. The first seat. The best view. The most privacy. Also, it was the stage for something Imani could never have anticipated. She placed her caramel-colored Fendi bag into the overhead bin, sat down, and opened her tablet to review the contract. She and her legal team had meticulously combed through every clause. There was no room for error. But she didn't know that the fundamental error was waiting elsewhere, not in the contract or strategy. It was coming. With a food tray. The sound of high heels clicked across the plush carpet. A flight attendant approached, blonde hair pulled back tightly, crimson lips painted with surgical precision. Her name tag read, Marlena Holt. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Marlena, the lead flight attendant for this cabin today." Imani looked up and nodded politely. "Hello. I believe the meal I pre-ordered was confirmed last week." Marlena smiled, the kind of smile Imani had seen hundreds of times. Polite, procedural, and completely soulless. "Oh yes, it's in the system. We'll be serving it shortly," Marlena replied, her voice devoid of warmth. She walked off briskly. "No thank you. No eye contact." Imani frowned slightly. Something felt off, but she remained silent. She had learned that not every injustice deserves an immediate response. Sometimes you let people reveal themselves. Behind her, laughter erupted from three middle-aged men in tailored suits, sipping champagne and discussing the gene market in East Asia with the confidence of men who believed the world was theirs. One of them was Lawrence DeWitt, CEO of a venture capital firm that had once refused to fund VitaGene because it lacked a suitable leadership image. Imani didn't look back. She tightened her grip on the armrest. That familiar gnawing sensation, the feeling of being seen as someone who didn't belong, pulsed quietly beneath the surface. 30 minutes later, Marlena returned. But this time, it wasn't with the pre-ordered gourmet meal. It was a cold sandwich in a plastic container. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It seems your meal is no longer available. There was a system error. This is the replacement," Marlena said with a stiff, forced smile. A moment of silence. No one in the cabin looked at Imani. They were too busy enjoying caviar and vintage wine. Imani stared at the sandwich, a thin slice of cold meat, 2 dry pieces of bread, and a plastic cup of water. No tablecloth, no silverware. No apology. It's just a deliberate disregard. A silent slap made of dismissal. She didn't touch the food. They didn't react immediately. She sat still, face composed, eyes like ice. The storm was forming, and Marlena Holt had no idea what she had just ignited. Imani Blake sat silently in seat 1A, her back resting against the cream-colored leather, her hands placed neatly on her knees, while the cold tray of food before her remained untouched, a silent, irrefutable piece of evidence. Across the cabin, champagne continued to flow into delicate crystal glasses, the soft golden lighting reflecting off tuxedo buttons as the business travelers chatted merrily. Not a single glance turned her way, not one person. Not even the man who had just been introduced as Professor Whitlock from the University of Bern questioned why the only black woman in the first-class cabin had been served a meal that looked more like something from the economy. They saw, but they didn't look, and Imani knew that truth all too well. This wasn't the first time she had been turned into a shadow in a luxurious room. At age 26, she had once stood quietly in the hallway of a biomedical conference when a gray-haired man asked her, "Are you here with your husband or working service?" She didn't answer that day. However, a year later, her paper on stem cell regeneration mechanisms was published in Nature. And that same man, the one who thought she was someone's +1, was forced to cite her work 3 times in his report. She didn't respond to belittle him. She acted so that no one would dare diminish her again. And now, she was once more facing the familiar, only this time in a more refined form. A sold-out meal, an indifferent excuse, a polite yet hollow manner of service, and above all the complicit silence of those around her. Imani leaned slightly toward the window, her eyes gazing into the deepening night sky as the aircraft crossed the Atlantic. She exhaled slowly. This wasn't about the food. This was about a system that allowed people like Marlena Holt to exist and be promoted. A system that bowed gracefully while pouring wine for a white man in a suit, but addressed a black female CEO as ma'am with the air of handing out charity. She turned her head and surveyed the cabin again, this time not as a passenger, but as an observer. Every small behavior, every subtle difference in treatment. There was admiration in Marlena's eyes as she served Lawrence DeWitt, the exaggerated bend of the waist as she poured wine for the Swiss professor. And for her, no one even asked, "Do you need anything else?" No one called her by name. They referred to her as ma'am or passenger, words chosen for distance, chosen for safety, to avoid the uncomfortable truth that she was someone they didn't believe belonged here. Seat 1A might have been printed on her boarding pass, but it never existed in their mental map of legitimate presence. Imani didn't need an apology. She needed evidence. She opened her smartwatch fingers, swiftly navigating the secure interface developed by Vitagene itself, an intelligent feedback system designed for elite partners. She located the attendant's ID, MH0925, Marlena Holt. Within seconds, the system displayed the preliminary data. 2 VIP complaints within 12 months. 1 unofficial internal flag for biased service behavior. Imani saved it all. She wasn't angry. She was preparing. Behind her, the clink of glasses echoed again. A loud laugh. Guess she's planning to take over the stem cell market. With a sandwich. Someone joked, full of insinuation. No one named names, but Imani knew precisely who they meant. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to, because the worst kind of insult is not shouted at your face. It's the kind endorsed by silence, dusted over with laughter. She reached toward the tray, lifted the sandwich, and then gently set it back down, untouched. It didn't deserve to be called dinner, and it certainly didn't deserve to be called a mistake. This was a silent declaration of war, and she would make sure the entire aviation industry heard it. A soft ding echoed through the first-class cabin as Imani Blake pressed the call button. It wasn't an emergency signal. It wasn't an act of confrontation. It was like the first draw on a bowstring, gentle, precise, and full of force. Daniel Moreau, a silver-haired flight attendant with polished manners honed through thousands of hours in the air, approached with a professional smile. But as his eyes landed on the woman in seat 1A, he hesitated, not because she looked familiar, but because something in her gaze was different. It wasn't the look of a disgruntled passenger. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Yes, Ms. Blake," Daniel asked, his voice as light as the air between clouds. Imani didn't respond immediately. She tilted her head just slightly enough to command Daniel's full attention, then spoke slowly. "I'd like to inquire about the policy for prioritizing premium meals when there's a shortage. According to Stratos Air's internal procedure, what criteria determine which guests are served first?" Daniel paused. The question sounded routine, but the tone of Imani's voice, the way her eyes never left him, made the air around them grow heavy. "Typically, it's based on the time the meal was pre-ordered and the guest's membership tier," he replied, his voice now losing its polish. Imani nodded subtly. "I'm an elite Sapphire member, the highest tier. I placed my meal order 7 days ago and received confirmation via email. Yet I was the only passenger in this cabin who was not served a premium meal." She paused. "If you say this wasn't biased, what exactly is happening here?" Daniel froze. Despite the ideal cabin temperature, sweat began to bead on his forehead. He stammered something about a system glitch and internal process, but Imani had already turned her face away before he could continue. She didn't need an excuse. She only needed clarity. She calmly unlocked her phone, logged into Vitagene's internal system, where she had top-level executive clearance, and entered a command initiate behavior trace. Crew ID MH0925. Flight 811. Priority level red. No one in first class noticed what had just happened. Marlena Holt was still bending forward, pouring wine for Radcliffe, the man who'd just told a racially charged joke disguised as linguistic satire. The gentlemen in seats 1B, 1C, and 1D were still chuckling smugly whenever she glanced their way. But they didn't know every move was now monitored and logged. In Vitagene's Manhattan headquarters, over 6,000 miles away, Imani's senior executive assistant, Asha Rowland, received the emergency signal. She didn't need to ask, "What's happening?" Because in the system they had built together, trust was placed in action, not explanations. Asha tied back her hair, put on her glasses, and opened a specialized dashboard, the secure interface for all VIP transport partners. Within 90 seconds, she pulled up Marlena Holt's file, a veteran employee, 2 prior complaints from black customers. One internal report cited implicit bias in service delivery, and an email once written, "Focus on guests who are more likely to tip others. Try to handle them quickly." No explicitly racist words, but the AI-powered behavioral analytics tool, co-developed by Imani and Asha, revealed a dangerous metric: biased interaction rate with non-white passengers, 84.7%. Far above the 25% internal alert threshold. Asha flagged it all, encrypted the report, and forwarded it directly to the CEO of Stratos Air, Charles Edmonds, the same man Imani had advised on diversity policy just 2 years earlier. Up in the sky, Imani. Blake remained seated, eyes closed as if resting. But in truth, a silent takedown had already begun. No statements, no cameras. There is no public escalation. Because she didn't need to shout to be heard. She only needed to make the system look at itself. Imani Blake sat upright in seat 1A. No one in the cabin looked at her. No flight attendant asked if she needed anything. And when the VIP names were called for chocolate mousse or Dom Perignon, only the easy-to-pronounce ones made the list: Radcliffe, Malcolm, and Clay. As for her, she was addressed as ma'am. No name, no acknowledgement. But that didn't make her disappear. It only made her stand out even more. Imani slowly lifted her smartwatch and saw a faintly glowing icon, the signal that Asha Rowland had begun collecting data. From this point forward, she knew that every action in the cabin, every footstep, facial expression, and careless word would be recorded under legal scrutiny. Marlena Holt passed by again. She still wore that polished smile as she asked Mr. Radcliffe another glass of Chardonnay. "Mr. Malcolm, would you like another hot towel, Mr. Clay?" How about trying the mousse? No one mentioned Imani. No one asked if she needed anything, even though her tray with the cold sandwich remained untouched on the table. It wasn't the food that was insulting. It was the silence. A selective silence aimed at those the system never assumed to belong. Imani lightly tapped her tablet screen, opening a series of live data streams: crew names, frequency of service per passenger, and response times to call buttons. A comparison chart appeared. Radcliffe responded to within 38 seconds. Malcolm, 41 seconds. Clay, 33 seconds. Imani Blake, no response after 6 minutes and 11 seconds. She tapped Save as Evidence. Then she switched to the AI facial analysis log. The data revealed a sharp contrast: deeper smiles and more eye contact when attending to white passengers. With Imani, no expression, no greeting by name, no eye contact. She hadn't been called by name, but now the system itself was calling her name. She typed a short message: to the Ethics Council of Guest Services. Activate bias interaction analysis. Flight 811. Crew code MH0925. Flag, brand reputation. Risk, priority, level amber. No one in the cabin realized a report was being compiled, not by the press or social media, but by the system that had once chosen to ignore her. On the other side of the signal, Asha Rowland smirked as she read the message. It wasn't a smile of satisfaction, but the quiet grin of someone who had just touched the nerve center of a rotting system. She opened the Organizational Culture Analytics dashboard and activated the bias behavior detection algorithm, which Imani co-developed herself. Marlena Holt's Service Bias Index hit 88.3% in less than 2 minutes, nearing the system's highest risk threshold. White passengers, 100% service, within 3 minutes. Non-white passengers, delayed, 5 minutes or ignored. Friendly gestures, shoulder touch. Calling my name, bending posture occurred 9 times with white passengers, 0 times with non-white passengers. Asha hit immediate report. Send to Stratos Air Headquarters, Geneva. Red level priority. Imani closed her tablet. Her gaze turned to the window. The night sky outside was still and quiet. But inside the cabin, the truth was being formatted, sealed, and submitted to a system that once believed it could sleep forever. She didn't need to be called by name. She only needed every data point to know who was sitting in seat 1A. And this time, they would not be able to pretend they didn't see her. Imani Blake sat motionless in seat 1A. Her eyes were no longer fixed on a screen, nor the cold sandwich growing dull beneath the soft, luxurious cabin lighting. Instead, she looked straight ahead, toward the aisle leading to the crew galley. It was an ordinary-looking place, but behind that door, a system was being engineered, one built on silence. On, "Sorry we ran out," and on smiles reserved for the right skin color. Marlena Holt passed by once again. No glance toward Imani. No acknowledgement. Not even a flick of the eyes. But she bent low to pour wine for Radcliffe and flashed a beaming smile at Malcolm as he dropped a weak joke about Asian stock markets. Imani typed a line into her smartwatch. Activate cabin data stream. Interaction. Duration. Nonverbal communication. Facial expressions from the crew. Target Holt. Marlena Asha. Rowland received the message in New York and immediately routed it through the behavioral AI analytics system. Footage from cabin cameras supplied to VIP partners like Morgan Tech kicked into operation. Within 2 minutes, Asha sent the first report. Average service time for white passengers, 42 seconds. For Imani Blake, 6 minutes, 11 seconds. Incorrect meal served. Name-based interaction. 0 times. Friendly demeanor. Smiles. Eye contact. Not recorded. Behavioral bias. Index. 88. 3%. Imani closed her eyes, but inside her mind was operating like a pre-programmed strategic engine. This wasn't about food anymore. It was about the right to be present, about the cost of having one's worth determined by skin color. She opened her tablet and navigated to the crew manifest. Scrolling through the personnel data, she stopped at one name: Marlena Holt, ID STR A2096, key file highlights. Employed at Aerovar Air since 2017. 2 previous unofficial reports of biased service internal email. Focus on the easy customers. Don't waste time on casuals. No disciplinary action was taken. Imani sent the content to her encrypted inbox and flagged it. Internal investigation, priority level. At that moment, footsteps echoed lightly. Another attendant, Daniel Clean, bent toward seats, 1C and 1D. Mr. Radcliffe. Mr. Malcolm. We're pleased to offer our featured dessert, chocolate mousse and premium cognac. Again, nothing for Imani. Not even a polite inquiry. She put the tablet down and looked up at Daniel. I have a question, Mr. Clenny. He flinched. A nervous smile flashed across his face. Yes, ma'am, Imani replied, calm but unwavering. According to Aerovar Air's internal policy, when meals are pre-ordered, who receives priority in the event of limited availability? Daniel froze, stammered. Usually by order time and frequent flyer status. Ma'am. Imani smiled, but it was the kind of smile that closed courtroom arguments. I'm a Platinum Diamond member. I ordered 7 days in advance. I have the email confirmation. So why am I the only non-white passenger? The one who didn't receive the meal I requested? Daniel had no answer. Sweat gathered on his brow, his eyes fixed on the carpet, as if a black hole beneath the luxury flooring was waiting to swallow every systemic error. Imani said nothing more. But Daniel understood. He had just become a witness in an investigation that could shake the entire first-class hospitality chain. She reopened her smartwatch log crew behavior. Daniel Clean. ID STR D6021. Evasive response. Observable bias in service. Across the ocean in Geneva, Aerovar Air's mainframe registered a cluster of red priority reports flagged under system-level threat. A whole crew evaluation order was triggered, and Imani Blake, once denied even the courtesy of her name, was now forcing an entire system to speak its name before the court. The dull silver tray in front of Imani Blake sat motionless like an unwilling witness to humiliation. A cold sandwich, 2 slices of chilled white chicken, a wilted piece of lettuce, and a half-filled cup of water. No silverware, no linen napkin, no explanation, no apology. In the first-class cabin, everything gleamed flawless, pristine, except for Imani's meal. And in that stark contrast, she saw what the luxury service industry had tried so hard to hide. Discrimination doesn't need to scream to exclude. She didn't touch the food, not out of pride, but because she wanted to remember. Every detail, every gesture, every passing glance, so no one could later call this a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Imani sat upright, hands gently resting on her knees. She didn't look down. She didn't hide. Because if she, a black woman, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar biotech firm, could be treated this way, how many others had already been quietly erased without anyone knowing? She remembered her first time walking into an investment boardroom in Chicago at age 30. A silver-haired man, a fund director, had turned to the assistant and asked, "Is she here to bring coffee?" Imani smiled and said, "If I brought the coffee, would that secure the $25 million you're considering for the AI security platform?" The room went silent, and from that day on, no one ever confused her role again. But Marlena Holt, the lead flight attendant on this flight, didn't know that, and perhaps they didn't care, because to Marlena, customers who didn't match the first-class aesthetic were merely exceptions to be tolerated. Imani flicked her fingers across her tablet. 2 new data points from Asha. Roland appeared. 03/14/2023. Black passenger, denied pre-ordered meal on flight 712. Attendant M. Holt. 09/02/2022. 2. Asian passengers served last, despite boarding first. Lead attendant M. Holt. No apologies were recorded, and no disciplinary actions were filed. Imani knew this was not a coincidence. It was a pattern, a shared denominator within a service model that only operated smoothly when white passengers were the default recipients of priority. But today, the cold sandwich on that silver tray wasn't just a meal. It was evidence, the beginning of an investigation. She opened a partner-linked application built into Stratus Air's security database, a system initially developed by Morgan Tech to help monitor high-tier client experience. A command was entered. Retrieve service behavior. Attendant, Marlena Holt. ID, STR A2096. Past 24 months. Search for bias pattern. In less than 30 seconds, the results came in. Low interaction rate with non-white passengers. 89 is 7%. Unofficial complaints. 6. No name usage with black passengers. 100%. Priority service for white passengers. 92.5%. Imani compiled the entire data set and sent it to a secured inbox with the subject line, Initiate Internal Investigation. Flight 917. Systemic Bias Case. CC. Stratos CEO. Legal Department. And 3 attorneys involved in last year's landmark racial discrimination suit against a global hotel chain. No press release. No confrontation. No pounding the table. She let the system indict itself. Imani exhaled quietly. Her face remained expressionless, but beneath it, she knew precisely what had begun a collapse, not fueled by outrage, but by evidence too undeniable to ignore. Across the aisle in first class, Marlena Holt was still pouring wine, still addressing every white guest by name, still laughing when Radcliffe said, "The fish is better than Tokyo this time." But Marlena didn't know that every action, smile, and unspoken bias was being recorded, and for the first time, the woman in seat 1A wasn't silent. Imani Blake didn't need to get angry. She didn't need to stand up, point fingers, or raise her voice in the cathedral-like silence of the first-class cabin. All she did was tap her smartwatch. A single encrypted signal was sent, and the system began to shift to the other side of the world. The plane cruised smoothly over the Atlantic. In the VIP cabin, the laughter of 3 white men still rang out. Radcliffe, Malcolm, and Clayton, the same men who had once rejected Morgan Tech's investment pitch due to its lack of senior leadership experience. They had no idea that now every glance, every word, every gesture theirs and the crew's was being recorded and analyzed by AI. And then a small moment changed everything. Flight attendant Marlena Holt returned to Radcliffe's seat with a crystal tray bearing a dessert, an expensive chocolate mousse garnished with caramelized orange peel. Her voice, light as a breeze, was unusually warm. "Mr. Radcliffe, would you like to try our special mousse today, sir?" Imani observed. She said nothing, but she noticed everything. She saw Marlena lean in to pour wine for Malcolm deeper than necessary. She saw Marlena place her hand gently on Clayton's forearm, a touch of familiarity, in a cabin where professionalism was expected to be contactless. But none of that happened when Marlena handed her a cold sandwich. No eye contact, no name, no follow-up. 12 minutes later, Imani's watch vibrated softly. Asha Roland, her senior executive assistant, had sent a preliminary report, a 23-page PDF. The title read, Service Discrimination Behavior Report. Marlena Holt, ID, STR A2096. Systemic risk level. High highlights included. The response rate to white passengers within 1 minute, 93%. The response rate to non-white passengers within 5 minutes only, 31%. Number of times white passengers were called by name on recent flights, 86. Number of times non-white passengers were called by name, 0. Internal note, May 2023. Focus on the easygoing guests. Don't waste time on the ones who tend to complain. One final note made Imani tighten her fist. Recommend monitoring behavior against global premium service ethics standards. Alert level red. Imani reopened her customer profile in the Stratus Air system. Diamond Elite 12. Consecutive years. Over 120 first-class flights. Rated as top-tier VIP. Priority guest. One of the 25 passengers was selected to provide strategic feedback to the airline. And yet today, she had been denied the pre-ordered meal by someone who never called her by name, never looked at her, and did not explain. That wasn't a mistake. That was silent exclusion. She wasn't angry. She didn't tweet. She didn't start filming. She sent another message. Activate internal culture. Monitoring protocol. Flight 917. Flag crew team of 3. Push. Report to Stratos CEO command code systemic culture trigger. And then she went quiet again, like someone waiting for the wind to shift. Across the ocean on the 42nd floor of Morgan Tech's New York HQ, Asha typed the final line in an outgoing email. Based on recurring behavior patterns, disparities in service interaction and cabin camera evidence, we recommend a formal investigation into systemic bias within the premium flight division. Emergency code, Geneva 1A request. Immediate meeting with legal counsel, executive board, and corporate culture consultants upon arrival. Imani unlocked her phone. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't breathe heavier. She tapped send, forwarding the entire data set to the CEO of Stratos Air 3 attorneys, who had previously won industry-wide racial bias lawsuits, and the chair of the Global Fair Service Council. Just one email, one subject line, one tap. But it was enough to bring an entire system to its knees. As the plane glided silently through the sky, Imani had already made an airline stop and looked in the mirror. The lights in the first-class cabin shifted from soft amber to pale blue, signaling the plane's entry into Swiss airspace. The captain's voice came over the intercom, gentle and composed. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now entering Geneva airspace. Estimated time to landing, 52 minutes. Imani Blake remained still in seat 1A, unmoving posture. Her hands are untouched by the tray of cold food, her head tilted slightly toward the small window, though her mind was far from the clouds and the faint blue horizon outside. Everything was simply a blurry backdrop to a silent counteroffensive, already well underway. She didn't need noise. This time, the system would expose itself. Marlena Holt passed by again, carrying a bottle of burgundy wine for Mr. Radcliffe, who laughed loudly after recounting how he once rejected a startup pitch because the female CEO seemed too inexperienced. Marlena leaned in, poured the wine with deliberate grace, and wore an unmistakable expression of admiration. Not once did she glance at 1A. No questions. No second glass of water. She had chosen who was worthy and who was not. Exactly 6 minutes later, Imani's smartwatch vibrated softly. A message from the CEO of Stratos Air report received. Internal investigation protocol activated. Red code. Geneva 1A. All cabin data will be retained. The emergency investigative unit will be present at the destination. Imani closed her eyes, not out of fatigue, but because she knew every piece was now falling into place. Marlena's every movement in the cabin was no longer just a service gesture. It was now evidence captured by Morgantech's AI system, temporarily granted access through a VIP data protection agreement. This was why Imani hadn't reacted when denied her meal. Because reaction was no longer the loudest voice. Evidence was. And evidence could dismantle an entire culture of bias. She opened her phone. The behavior tracking dashboard appeared instantly. Name, Marlena Holt. Flights in the past 12 months. 186. Negative feedback from non-white passengers. 17. Most recent warning. Never received bias rating based on tone and service time. 89.7%. Conclusion. There is a high risk to brand reputation if retained in VIP service roles. She saved it and sent it to 3 legal advisors who had previously won landmark racial bias cases against global hotel chains, to the director of corporate culture at Aerovar Air, to the chair of the International Ethics Council for Service Industries. Subject line: Supplementary documentation. Request for investigation into repeated discriminatory behavior in first-class service. Geneva. 1A. Inside the cabin. Radcliffe's laughter continued. So did Marlena's polished hand gestures as she bid farewell to Clayton. But Imani heard none of it. She had chosen not to argue because every voice needed had already been spoken by the system itself. And this time, the system could no longer ignore it. The plane began its descent. On the ground, a rapid response investigation team was already waiting. The plane's tires screeched softly against the Geneva runway. The crew made their routine announcement over the intercom. We have landed at Geneva International Airport. Please remain seated until the safety signal is turned off. Seat 1A did not move. Imani. Blake slowly unfastened her seatbelt. No rush. No glances around. She stood calmly, straightened the deep navy lapels of her blazer, and slung her bag over her left shoulder. A symbol of preparedness, not retreat. She knew exactly who was waiting outside, and why. At the aircraft door, there were no smiling flight attendants, no fresh flowers for first-class guests. Instead, 2 individuals in black suits, name tags around their necks, and eyes full of solemn professionalism. Brandon Ellis, Regional Director of Aerovar Air, Europe. Ariel Dufour, Head of Legal Affairs, Geneva Division. Brandon lowered his head respectfully, trying to maintain composure. Welcome, Ms. Blake. On behalf of Stratos, we would like to offer our sincerest apologies for Imani raised her hand. Her voice was calm but loud enough for everyone in the first-class cabin to hear. No apologies needed, because this is only the beginning. She walked past them. No handshake, no turning back. Brandon and Ariel stood frozen, knowing that her words were not a threat. They were a verdict. Meanwhile, at the aircraft's rear, the flight crew tidied up the cabin for disembarkation. Marlena Holt still wore her signature smile, slightly tilting her head as she said goodbye to Radcliffe. To her, it was just another flight completed. But everything changed at the end of the corridor, leading to the crew quarters. 3 individuals in black uniforms, badges reading Emergency, Internal Affairs, stood waiting. One held up a tablet. On the screen, in bold letters, Entire crew of Flight 9117. Please proceed to Emergency Briefing Room 2. Marlena froze. Her smile vanished. Daniel Clean, the colleague who had avoided answering Imani earlier, now wore a blank, shell-shocked expression. No one on the crew spoke. No one was laughing anymore. Marlena looked around, seeking an ally, a shred of doubt, a comforting word. There was none. They were no longer crew. They were now subjects of an active investigation. The corridor was lit like a courtroom. Every footstep echoed like a line of indictment. None of them realized that every behavior tone delay and interaction had already been recorded analyzed and cross-referenced, and a conclusion had already been reached. In the VIP corridor, Imani was gently escorted through a private gate. No cameras, no media, just the soft hum of her phone. A message from Aaliyah. The investigation team has received the evidence. Whitmore was temporarily suspended. A formal hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Geneva. Top tier. Emergency status. Imani didn't reply. She stepped into the waiting limousine. The door closed. No one saw her face in that moment, but had they looked closely, they would have seen one unmistakable truth. This was no longer about her. This was a system-wide reckoning, and it had only just begun. 10:48 p.m. Stratus Air Headquarters, Geneva Conference Room. No one, reserved only for executive-level emergency meetings, had been lit for over 4 hours. On the LED screen glowed a blood-red header. Emergency Incident. Flight 917. Systemic Ethics Review. Required. Charles Edmonds. The current CEO of Stratus Air sat in silence at the head of the table. In front of him lay a thick 23-page file printed in red preliminary report on passenger discrimination. Incident involving Morgan Nova. CEO Imani Blake. Under the stark white lights of the conference room, regional executives, legal department heads, HR directors, and crew representatives were all present. No one cracked a joke. No one dared breathe too loudly. On the screen, the face of Aaliyah Grant appeared, connected via live feed from Morgan Nova's New York office. Her eyes never left the lens. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was cold and sharp as a scalpel. We do not need an apology, Morgan. Nova does not require a press release or ceremonial statements. We require confirmation that Stratus Air does not tolerate discriminatory behavior, not even in its most subtle forms. No excuses, no evasion. She played a video clip footage from the internal cabin camera in first class. Marlena Holt appeared, tray in hand, her voice even. It seems the order wasn't recorded in the system. Happens all the time. Then came the statistics. Average response time for white passengers, 42 seconds. Response time for Imani Blake, 6 minutes, 11 seconds. Meal pre-ordered, 7 days prior. Denied without explanation. No one in the room spoke. The VP of Customer Service furrowed her brows. The legal advisor tilted his head and scribbled notes non-stop. Charles Edmonds placed his hands flat on the table, tapping 3 times like a judge signaling a verdict. Effective immediately, the entire flight crew of Flight 917 is placed under temporary suspension. A full investigation will be launched into every flight where Marlena Holt served as crew in the past 24 months. He turned to the HR representative. By tomorrow morning, I want a proposal to reform our service training program and Ms. Blake to serve on the advisory board. Not if possible. Mandatory. One regional director frowned. You mean you'll let her rewrite our policy? Edmonds didn't hesitate. Not let, require. Because if we don't act now, Stratus will no longer be a luxury brand. It'll be the face of silent rot in high-end service. 12:27 a.m. An internal memo is sent to more than 22,000 Stratus employees worldwide. Subject line, urgent. Suspension of flight attendant. Marlena Holt. Activation of system-wide service training reform. Final signature. Charles Edmonds, Chief Executive Officer. No press. No fanfare. But that night, Stratus executive offices in London, Tokyo, and New York remained lit. What began as a cold sandwich and a raised eyebrow had split open a crack in the system, now erupting into a global industry earthquake. And at its epicenter stood one name, Imani Blake. 8:11 a.m. The next morning, The hashtag #Seat1A begins appearing across Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. It starts with a short post from a journalist who once interviewed Imani. She didn't get angry. She didn't argue. She said, "I understand now." And an entire industry bowed its head. #Seat1A. An hour later, a wave follows. Influential voices from Black CEOs to fashion designers, civil rights lawyers to high school teachers, all share. "I've never sat in seat 1A, but I know what it feels like to be overlooked. I understand now too." #Seat1A. Within 6 hours, the campaign erupts. 15,000 posts, 8,000 shares from corporate accounts, over 11,000 emails flood. Stratos Air's headquarters from VIP clients across the globe. In London, 3 major investment firms simultaneously issue formal letters demanding a corporate culture reform summit if Stratos wants continued funding. In Washington, a senior advisor from the U.S. Department of Transportation calls Charles Edmonds requesting an internal equity audit for luxury air travel services. In Nairobi, Kenya national newspapers feature photos of Imani Blake with headlines like, "The woman in seat 1A made the world take a second look." At a lakeside hotel in Geneva, Imani doesn't attend press conferences. No live stream. No cameras. She's sitting quietly in a small room across from 3 Black women working in hospitality and aviation. Women were dismissed, overlooked, and never dared to speak out. One young woman voice trembling asks, "Can you teach me how to speak up? I don't know where to start." Imani meets her gaze, calm and steady. "You don't have to scream. You don't have to cry. You need to know the right moment, and when it comes, don't look away. Stand tall, and let the truth speak for itself." At Stratus's Geneva office, a second emergency meeting takes place. On the table are 3 documents. 1 permanent suspension recommendation for Marlena Holt. A complete overhaul of crew training programs from unconscious bias, awareness to sensitive situation response. 3. A proposal to appoint Imani Blake as strategic advisor for equity and service culture, the first time in the airline's history that an outsider is asked to rewrite the company's cultural foundation. When Charles Edmonds signs, no one opposes. Not because Imani is a victim, but because she has become the standard. At Bloomberg's newsroom, the headline splashes across the front page. Imani didn't need to shout. A CEO who made the aviation industry bow with one look, a quiet subheading underneath, and just one sentence, "I understand now." That afternoon, Imani received an email from Stratos' executive board. "We formally invite you to join our global initiative. Redefine luxury, redefining premium service through equity, not appearance." Imani doesn't reply immediately. Instead, she sends back a single file, a 12-page strategy document titled "From Seat 1A to Every Seat, a Transformation Program, not based on apologies but on action." And beneath it, a straightforward note. "I don't need privilege. I need a system that knows how to face the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." 3 months later, at the Global Summit on Equity in Luxury Services, held in Singapore, hundreds of executives from airlines, hospitality, and tech conglomerates gather inside a glass-walled auditorium overlooking Marina Bay. Soft lights illuminate the stage where a silent clip is playing. The screen shows a Black woman, Imani Blake, seated in seat 1A, aboard Stratos Flight 91 scene. On the table before her, a cold meal tray, chicken sandwich, a half-filled glass of water, a flimsy paper napkin. There is no dramatic soundtrack, no narration, only silence, and a composed, almost chillingly calm expression. At the end of the video, a faint line of text appears. No shouting needed. No anger is required. Just the right moment. The room is utterly still. At the Aerovar Air CEO office in New York, a new plaque now hangs in the crew training wing hallway. Lessons from Seat 1A. Every action, however small, leaves a trace. Luxury service is not about fine wine or silk napkins. It starts with respecting human dignity. Beneath the words, a carved emblem of a white chair bears 3 simple words. We remember you. At Morgantech. Imani sits quietly handwriting a letter on blank paper, the ink a calm shade of blue, her penmanship shaped by a lifetime of patience and self-respect. The recipient is a 16-year-old girl in Atlanta, a young woman who had written to Imani after reading a Forbes article, sharing how her career counselor once said, "You should probably choose a service job. High tech isn't for someone like you," Imani writes back. They will always have reasons to tell you that you don't belong because of your voice, your hair, or your skin. But you don't need to get angry to prove anything. You need to show up at the right moment and not back down. She signs the letter. At the bottom, a quiet postscript. P.S. If they won't let you sit in seat 1A, ask them, who was this system built for? On a fall flight from Cape Town to Paris, Imani boards, first class alone. No entourage, no press secretary, no announcement. In front of seat 1A, a small hand-carved wooden sign reads, "Reserved. The seat of change." Beneath it, another engraved line. "We remember you." Imani smiles gently, says nothing. She sits. She fastens her seatbelt. The plane begins to roll down the runway, and as it takes off, the sky isn't any more expansive, but the world has already changed. One small action, one cold refusal, one steady gaze. It was enough to make an entire industry pause and reflect. Imani Blake did not shout. She did not cry. She did not stand up in first class to make a speech. She said only one thing I understand now, and that quiet became the loudest voice of all, a voice that made the world stop and listen. Have you ever been denied the place you rightfully deserved? And if it happens, will you choose silence? Or will you choose the right moment to act? Share your story. Because sometimes to change an entire system, all it takes is one person willing to sit in the right seat